The small village of Ravenswood had always been shrouded in mystery and fear. Nestled deep in the forest, it was a place where the sun seemed to shine less brightly and the shadows stretched longer. For centuries, the villagers spoke in hushed tones about the curse that hung over their home, the legend of the vampires of Ravenswood. Elena and her brother, Marcus, were newcomers to the village. They had inherited their late uncle's old manor, a decaying relic on the outskirts of the village. Despite the warnings from the locals, they decided to move in, eager to start a new life away from the chaos of the city. "It's just superstition," Marcus said as they unpacked their belongings. "There's no such thing as vampires." Elena nodded, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over her since they arrived. The manor was cold, and the air seemed to hum with a malevolent energy. That night, as they settled in, a storm rolled in, drenching the village in rain and thunder. Elena lay awake, listening to the howling wind and the creaking of the old house. Suddenly, she heard a soft tapping on her window. Heart pounding, she crept to the window and peered out into the darkness. Standing outside was a figure, pale and motionless. Its eyes glowed an unnatural red, and its mouth twisted into a sinister smile, revealing sharp, gleaming fangs. Elena gasped and stumbled back, but the figure was gone in a flash, leaving only the echo of its chilling presence. The next morning, she told Marcus about the apparition. He dismissed it as a nightmare, but Elena was not convinced. Determined to find answers, she began to explore the manor, searching for any clues about the history of the house and the village. In the dusty attic, she found an old journal, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It belonged to her uncle, and the pages were filled with frantic scribbles and drawings of creatures with fangs and blood-red eyes. June 12, 1856, they came again last night. The vampires. They took another from the village. I fear they will come for me next. Elena's heart raced as she read the entries. Her uncle had been hunting vampires, and it seemed the creatures were still very much real. That night, as the storm raged on, Elena and Marcus bolted the doors and windows, hoping to keep the monsters at bay. But as midnight approached, the air grew thick with an oppressive silence. The candles flickered and went out, plunging the manor into darkness. "Elena, do you hear that?" Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. A low, guttural growl echoed through the halls, followed by the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate. The siblings huddled together, gripping the makeshift wooden stakes they had fashioned from chair legs. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped right outside their door. The doorknob turned slowly, and the door creaked open. In the dim light of the storm, they saw him, a tall, gaunt figure with pale skin stretched tight over his bones. His eyes glowed like embers, and his fangs glistened with a hungry anticipation. "Welcome," he hissed, his voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "To your new home." Marcus lunged at the vampire, but the creature moved with inhuman speed, catching him by the throat and lifting him off the ground. Elena screamed and swung her stake, but the vampire swatted her away effortlessly. "You cannot escape," the vampire said, tightening his grip on Marcus. "You are ours now." Desperate, Elena scrambled to her feet and grabbed the journal. She remembered reading about a way to repel the vampires, a ritual her uncle had written about. With trembling hands, she recited the incantation, her voice rising above the storm. The vampire snarled, his grip loosening on Marcus. "No," he roared, but it was too late. The air crackled with energy, and the vampire was thrown back, writhing in agony. Elena continued the incantation, her voice growing stronger. The vampire's skin began to blister and smoke, and he let out a blood-curdling scream as he dissolved into ash. Gasping for breath, Marcus fell to the floor. "Elena, you did it," he whispered, his voice weak. But their relief was short-lived. From the shadows, more vampires emerged, their eyes glowing with a hunger that chilled Elena to the bone. She realized then that the fight was far from over. The storm raged on, and the manor echoed with the sounds of the battle. The siblings fought valiantly, but the vampires were relentless. As the night wore on, their strength waned, and the creatures closed in. In the final moments, as the first light of dawn began to break through the storm clouds, Elena and Marcus made their last stand. With one final, desperate effort, they drove the remaining vampires back, using the incantation in their makeshift stakes. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the darkness, the vampires shrieked and burst into flames, leaving only ash in their wake. Exhausted and bloodied, the siblings collapsed to the floor, clutching each other. "We did it," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible, but Elena knew better. As she looked around the ruined manor, she felt the lingering presence of the evil that had haunted their family for generations. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. And in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her, she heard the faint whisper of a promise, a vow from the darkness that the vampires would return. The curse of Ravenswood was not so easily broken, and the house on Blackwood Lane would never be free from its horrors.